Photos are a great asset, but for me, it's never about copying. It's about responding. Today I'll show you how I take a reference and let it evolve through expressive, intuitive painting. Welcome back for another lesson. So, I've actually held off making this video for a while because I never wanted this channel to be about copying any kind of reference material, whether that's a photo, as we're doing in this video, or some sort of a still life installation. My goal essentially for this channel has always been about creating art that's intuitive, expressive, that's geared around mark making, that goes beyond the surface, goes beyond what's external, and more focuses on painting from the inside out. But there's been a lot of questions about how I use reference photos, so today I'm going to do a bit of a dive, but with a twist. So I'll show you how a photo can guide you without literally dictating the outcome. So if you're following me here, you know that I visited New York City a few weeks back, and I figured let's use some of the reference material I have from our visit for this week's demo. Whenever I visit a place, and particularly if it's a painting trip, I try to distill the essence of the place. What gives it life? What makes it feel unique? These are some shots of our recent trip to New York City, which surprised me really with regards to the amount of greenery and walkability of the city and some of the vibrant colors as you see some of these reference photos that I took. This is the one that we're going to be working off of for today's painting session. And as expected, there's a lot of information. So let me take you to Photoshop. This is Photoshop Elements that I'm using. And first thing that I'm going to do is remove some of the color. Now, color, of course, is the driving force of dictating mood in any kind of painting, certainly of all of mine. But once you remove it, you get to the backbone of the photo that you're working off of. And what I'm doing here is I'm just indicating where I want the dark part of the painting to sort of appear in my final piece. I'm indicating the perspective lines, radiating lines. I'm also indicating right now that building there is kind of hindering those radiating lines that are leading towards that horizon line, and that focal point, that back building in the back, I'm not sure what building that is, but as you can see, it is illuminated orange. You will see in a second here. Yes, there it is. So I know the color will of course be different than this reference photo. I'll talk a bit about that as we paint, but one thing I will certainly do is also crop, and you can see it there now, this particular piece to more of a square format. I haven't talked about this previously on my channel, but there's something powerful about square format paintings. I don't know what it is. If you know, or if you have some sort of insight with regards to that, I've used this format a lot and I like it. That's as good a reason as any to keep using it. So we've cropped this photo. We're working off of that photo. You see it there on the bottom right. And I'm starting to make marks. I am referencing the photo. You can see the dark line that I've put down with this 3-inch brayer that's sort of leading the eye towards that highlight on that building that's sort of warm. The whole painting will be kind of coolish per se, and this is part of the reason why I chose to do that warm yellow underpainting, because it'll accentuate the final piece, the cool sky and the cool buildings that get laid down subsequently. So, using a photo as a reference, let's start with something I think a lot of us wrestle with. How do you balance representational and abstract elements in your work? More often than not, what you see online is artists take one direction or the next. For me, it's not about choosing one over the other, it's more of a conversation between the two. So what I'll often do is I'll begin with a loose sense of the subject, as I'm doing with these initial layers using the smaller brayer now. Brayer, by the way, if you follow me at all, is one of my favorite tools in creating these broad strokes of lights, darks, whatever. It layers color beautifully. So we've already determined what the negative and positive will be of the space, i.e. the darks and the lights. And I'm using these tools, as I've indicated, the brayer and these palette knives, to lay down these strokes. I've got a slight mixture of wax mixed into this oil paint, and it's creating these interesting marks on the surface. I'm following, as I said, the predetermined no-tan design that I've set out for myself, and I'm, as I said, making these marks using these wide tools. I am kind of, in a sense, hijacking my brain, and this is something that you can try as well in your work. If you have a tendency to try to literally copy your reference material, if you use these larger, broader tools like I'm doing there with this squeegee, for example, more often than not you'll be surprised with interesting marks that will come out of that. And second, you can try and test this out yourself. Maybe you've done this and let me know down below. Test this out. So you take a broader tool like this knife or the squeegee or, as I said, the brayer, and create as realistic of a mark as you possibly can. And you'll see what comes out of that. You won't be able to do it, or you'll get, I guess, close. And that close will be interesting to look at, in my opinion. So what we're doing here, as I said, we're laying down these marks. We're using a squeegee. We're using all sorts of different tools to make interesting marks. You are letting intuition guide where the painting wants to go. So if a mark feels honest, even if it doesn't look like anything literal, I usually keep it. Abstraction brings energy and mystery, while representational part of the painting kind of anchors the whole thing for the viewer. It's that whole constant push and pull, that tension between what's seen and what's implied, that is, I think, one of the most interesting part of creating art on a daily basis. So I think the whole point throughout this painting process, where you were referencing a photo and you're trying to create something quote unquote interesting, is to try not to overplan. So let the reference photo give you a general direction, but constantly check in with the painting itself and ask, does this still feel alive? And if you have to, deconstruct things, remove them, erase them. You need to allow the piece itself to speak for itself to you and to the viewer. That's the intuitive part, and this is something that you'll likely struggle with, and it'll take time to sort of get right. But the point isn't to get it right. The point is to enjoy the process, and I think that's I guess less about precision and more about presence. Whenever you're working from reference materials like photographs, you'll likely come to crossroads and ask yourself, do I include this? Do I take it away? What do I do? By its very nature, photographs will likely have a whole lot of information, and you'll sort of simplify things and take things out, like I am doing for this particular demonstration. You'll see as we get closer to completion, most of it was sort of just indicated. A lot of the windows, if not all of them, were not included. As I said earlier in the video, some of the buildings were removed. Simplify, simplify, simplify. But beyond that, I will give you here a few more, I suppose, meat and potato, more practical advices for your own work from the perspective of things we kind of already touched on like edges, for example. So what you can do with those is try to keep them as loose as possible to create this ambiguity. You can, this is particularly truthful for cityscape work. So if you can blend or blur areas to let forms dissolve into the background or each other. I kind of mentioned this last week with regards to my visit to the Met and viewing the work of John Singer Sargent. He had this tendency as well. A lot of his marks were loose, dissolving, disappearing, and then he used sharpened edges selectively. You use hard edges sparingly to guide focus and to anchor the viewer. The second thing with regards to best practices and working off photos addresses drawing itself, so form and structure. So, and again, you'll see with regards to my finished work here, I use the reference material selectively, but I of course loosened the contour. I allowed lines to dissolve, as I said before, to suggest rather than define. You want to simplify and exaggerate shapes selectively. You can, I guess if you can use some sort of a metaphor, you can use drawing as a scaffolding of sorts. You begin with representational structure, then distort or obscure selectively as the piece evolves. This, of course, is just one of the ways you can approach your work. Of course, you can go with full abstraction, and I do that a lot of times as well. But for this demo, I started off rendering some indications of what I am trying to copy, because this is in fact my take on how I look at photos and how I approach rendering from a photo. I mean, I could have come in here and done something entirely different than the photo and said, this is how I felt during that moment. I mean, of course, it becomes extremely esoteric and philosophical, but as I said, the actual process, you can always just start with full abstraction, full mark making and shapes, and then pull something out of that. And in fact, I will likely do that for next week's demo, which may be, I'm not entirely certain, a painting of my daughter. So another figurative work. I haven't done those in a few weeks. I'm kind of edging and looking forward to it. I haven't done those, as I said, for a while now. Now that we take a step back and see what we've created thus far, it looks, I guess, kind of interesting. I like some of the shapes that I've already put down. Maybe a bit muddy. It's definitely chaotic. So up until this point, we've essentially been building this groundwork, laying in this underpainting. Essentially the whole thing was underpainting. I have kept things in the middle value range for the most part. I have pushed some of the darks in the front. Now's the time to shift gears and start pulling shapes forward. I'm applying this background cool blue for the sky, and again, this is reflective, as you can see there, of the sky in my reference photo, which again, it's certainly different than what I will be putting together for our finished piece here. You see me using that putty knife, and I am laying down color. It's got a bit more wax for this particular stage of the painting than the underpainting, and I'm not limiting myself to the lines, certainly not everywhere. I think this is as good a time as any to sort of cover color, because I think it's quite important. And of course, many of you are watching this looking at the reference photo in the bottom right and saying that's definitely not the color of the sky, the building, the background. And of course, the answer is you're right. This is a big point, so it's difficult for me to sort of probably teach this in a short video like this, and in fact I'm constantly learning this as well. Color, as I said in the beginning, is so important for setting the mood and tone. And a lot of times I'll start with a certain color value or family of colors that I know that I want to introduce. And it's kind of closely linked to the thing I talked about initially, where you want to understand a place, you want to know the essence of the place. So I chose to include a lot of the local color, then kind of break away. So the building, of course, in the front is a combination of raw sienna, maybe cad, red middle, maybe a bit of alizarin, crimson, and then of course some of the distant buildings with the warm cad yellows and oranges, and of course the sky. But overall, the prevailing sort of color is a combination of that phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, and the sap greens, the chrome oxide greens that I've used throughout this painting. So again, with respects to color, you want to let feeling guide your palette as much as possible. Instead of asking what color is this object, you should be asking what energy or feeling does this space need. I know this is difficult to implement, but again, that's just how I approach it. So emotional color choices lead to more expressive work. Like a warm ochre might communicate nostalgia, while a jarring red could introduce tension or drama. Another thing that's kind of in line with this kind of thinking is this idea of trying to mix things instinctively with regards to color and tones. What I've done here, and particularly with the underpainting, I've created what again I kind of refer to as possibly muddy or off color, but that kind of creates this honest visceral feel that kind of perfectly matches the overall tone of what I was after for this particular piece. So the end result, and we'll see that in a few minutes, it's much more of a moody, maybe even a twilight scene, whereas opposed the reference photo is, of course, you can see it's sunset. It was close to sunset, but not as moody, not as, I don't know what the word is, emotionally deep as my painting, I think. So last point with regards to color that I want to mention is to let go of literal light, and that again is exactly what I was just mentioning. You're not bound by how light actually behaves. I mean, you are, and of course perspective is important, and you want to have these lines converge properly. By the way, I don't even know if I did all that well with regards to that for this particular painting. I was more focused on marks and maybe not so much perspective lines. But what I was saying with regards to literal light, you can use shifts in value and hue to suggest light abstractly if you want. And I'll get to more of what that means towards the end of this painting. But color acts or can act as light, mood, or atmosphere. So a shadow doesn't have to be gray. It can be blue, violet, or even green, or a whole lot of it can be green with regards to my painting. And that serves the overall piece and the intention of the painting. As we listen to the ambient noise of my studio with that squeaky chair and the car and the podcast in the background, I've zoomed you in to show you some of the marks that we've made thus far with the tools that we made them. So you see a lot of broken color, a lot of interplay of light, and that background color that I'm putting in right now, the focal point if you want. The whole thing really acts uniformly as a focal point, but that radiating lines are pointing to that background. Building the last point with regards to it and color that I want to make is, and this is something you can implement of course in your own work, is to start with local color and then break away. Once the structure is in place, you can feel free to shift away, introduce unexpected hues, that reflect mood more than reality. Remember that abstract color doesn't mean random color. You still need to adhere to certain temperature shift, saturation, and contrast, and use those to guide the eye and balance the overall painting. You can use pure chroma, although I have used it on this channel, but I seldom do it in my own work. I use it as a teaching piece. You can use pure chroma in focal areas if you so want, and then possibly mute and neutralize everything else. I've kind of reserved the focal point for, as I said, this building, and I don't necessarily need to push the chroma any more than I already did. And I'm essentially breaking color relationships intentionally, but only after I've already established mood and saturation through introduction of local color. Last point that I'd like to make for this week's lesson is that texture created through layers adds a certain tension and atmosphere that flat paint just cannot. You see this side view, I wanted to introduce this, and you see all the multitude of layers as I'm putting in the final top coat in that corner. Oftentimes what I see with students do, and even the ones that practice that sort of deviate from representational and go more into abstraction, oftentimes I see them, you create a drawing and then you fill in that shape, whatever that might be. Drawing plays a vital role, and it's very important. It's one of the cornerstones of strong representational work, but don't be, I guess, bound by the drawing. Push the drawing, go beyond the borders of the drawing, whether with this cityscape work or even figurative work. Push and pull, deconstruct and construct, and whatever you get on the back end will feel much more visceral and alive. You start to feel the painting as much as see it, and that physicality invites the viewer in on a much more of a deeper and on an emotional level, really. As I finish this painting off with these highlights, the warm reds in the front, I want to thank you for watching, and I'm sure you've got questions. I've talked a bunch in this video. There's some concepts here that I'm sure to cover in future videos, but in the meantime, if I've skipped over something, or if you have questions or just some interest or comments on the whole process, let me know down below. For now, let's see what we've created. I am zooming in as I always do to show you these marks that we've done, and I didn't include it in this video, but I took a bit of time to paint those cars in to again anchor this piece and give it more life. Again, thank you for watching. I will see you in next week's video lesson.